From the outside, everyone thought my sister and I were inseparable. We grew up sharing clothes, secrets, and dreams. She was my best friend, my confidant, the one person I believed would never hurt me. To our family and friends, we were the picture of sisterhood, smiling in every photo, always standing side by side. But behind the smiles, cracks had already begun to form. She envied the opportunities one had worked hard for, my job, my reputation, my independence. I never noticed the bitterness in her eyes, because I was too blinded by love and trust. It all started with small things, a misplaced letter, a bank notification I didn't understand, and strange calls asking for details I had never given out. At first, I brushed it off as mistakes or spam. I didn't know she had already begun weaving a web in my name, stealing my identity piece by piece. I had no idea my own sister was slowly taking over my life, until one shocking moment forced me to face the truth. It was a Tuesday morning when everything came crashing down. I was sipping coffee before work when I opened a letter that didn't belong to me, at least, not the version of me I knew. It was from a credit company, congratulating me on being approved for a luxury car loan worth more than I could ever dream of buying. My hands shook as I read the paper. I never applied for this. At first, I thought it was a scam. But when I called the company, they read back my details. My full name, my date of birth, my social security number. Everything matched, except the address. It was hers. My sister's. My heart sank. I felt a rush of disbelief, then anger. I wanted to deny it, to tell myself it was a mistake. But when I checked my bank account, my credit score, and my tax records, the truth slapped me in the face. Someone had been living as me. And not just anyone, it was her. The worst part. She hadn't just stolen my name for survival. She was using it to live a lavish life I could never afford, expensive clothes, fancy dinners, trips she never told me about. All of it, in my name. And if I didn't act fast, I'd be the one buried in debt while she smiled for the world. I stared at my reflection in the mirror that night, whispering the question I was too afraid to ask aloud. How could my own sister betray me like this? But betrayal only burns until it hardens. And that night, I made a silent promise. If she thought she could take my life, I would take it back, piece by piece. When the shock wore off, something inside me settled. Panic had its moment, but then a steadier, colder resolve took over. This wasn't just about money or credit checks. This was about dignity, about the life someone had built using my name without my consent. And it was personal. It was family. The first step was survival, stop the damage, protect myself. I called the banks, the credit agencies, the DMV. I froze accounts, filed fraud reports, placed fraud alerts on my credit, and informed the companies that the applications were fraudulent. It felt bureaucratic and humiliating. Explaining to strangers that a sister had used my identity felt unreal, but it was necessary. Each call, each form, each promise of "we'll investigate" was a stitch in a strategy to patch what she'd ripped apart. But practical steps alone wouldn't be enough. I needed evidence, not just my word against hers. So I started collecting the trail she'd left, purchase receipts in my name, shipping confirmations to her address, photos on social media of things charged to accounts that belonged to me. I printed screenshots, saved emails, and documented every interaction with cold, clinical precision. Where anger burned, paperwork cooled it down into something useful. I hired a lawyer who specialized in identity theft and family disputes. The first meeting felt surreal, sitting across from a person whose job was to turn my private pain into legal leverage. He listened, asked careful questions, and then said, "We can make them pay." I liked the certainty of those words. Not because I wanted to destroy my sister, though part of me did, but because I wanted to reclaim control. Confrontation came next, but not the dramatic shouting match I'd imagined. That would have been satisfying in a small, immediate way, but we needed durability. We needed proof presented in a context that would prevent her from simply changing addresses or hiding under an apology. So we built the moment. I invited her for coffee, sitting across the table in the same kitchen we had fought and laughed in as children. The familiarity felt like a knife. I placed a small stack of printed documents between us, account statements, a timeline of fraudulent activity, photos of packages sent to her, and the email confirmations. My hands were steady. She took one look, her face blanching, and for a second, she looked truly small, not the sister I'd known, not the woman who had laughed over family jokes, but someone cornered. "What is this?" she whispered, voice shaking. "You know what it is," I replied. "You've been living my life on paper and in the world. These are the things you took." I watched the color drain from her face, watched the flinch when her fingers grazed a receipt with a boutique's name she'd always claimed she could never afford. At first she lied. "I didn't think it would hurt you," she said. "I just needed a way out." I had heard excuses before. But this time, I could see the cage of guilt closing around her words. She tried to bargain for sympathy. She tried to paint herself as desperate. There were tears. There were promises. There were reasons that sounded like pleas. I had a choice: give in to the ache of shared history, or do what I had prepared for, stop her from hurting me again. I chose the latter. We left the coffee shop with formal statements already filed, copies of evidence submitted to authorities. My lawyer sent a formal cease and desist and prepared civil claims for damages. The legal process is slow, procedural, but in that slowness, there is a kind of justice that doesn't rely on theatrics. It relies on facts, on verifiable records, on law. The fallout was immediate in some ways and gradual in others. Her friends stopped answering her calls when they learned of the fraud. The credit agency reversed charges after weeks of investigation, and the loan application that had threatened my financial future was rescinded. Merchants refunded purchases once they were shown the proof. My credit score, which had dropped, slowly began to recover as the fraud alerts and identity theft reports took effect. The family dynamic, however, was the hardest part. When the truth was undeniable, my parents didn't leap to her defense. They were angry, at her, at me, at one another. The home that had felt safe fractured into rooms of silence and accusations. My mother cried in private, saying she was ashamed and sorry, while my father refused to engage. My brother avoided my eyes and the house altogether. The same family photos that once felt warm now looked staged, like a set for a life that only pretended to be real. People always ask if exposing a loved one feels like betrayal. It's complicated. I didn't want to ruin her life. I wanted her to stop taking mine. There's a difference. I also wanted to be clear, the law wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. When someone weaponizes your identity for personal gain, the harm ripples outward, to landlords, to lenders, to future employers. If it goes unchecked, more people become collateral. There were ugly moments. She called me in the early days of the investigation, crying and promising to make amends. I listened at first, then hung up. There were nights I doubted my decision, asking myself if perhaps I could have handled it differently, with therapy, with time, with forgiveness. But then I would remember the black and white of the receipts, the pictures of luxuries charged to my name, and the hollow terror when creditors called. That memory hardened into resolve. Through it all, I rebuilt. I set up identity monitoring, new passwords, a locked mailbox, a P.O. box address for sensitive documents. I changed passwords I'd been careless about. I became meticulous in ways that felt paranoid at first but eventually became routine. The months of paperwork and court hearings were draining, yet in the small victories, a refunded charge, a cleared report, I reclaimed pieces of myself. The legal outcome was a mixed victory. There was restitution ordered in civil court, a portion of assets linked to the fraud were returned, and my sister was mandated to undergo counseling and make reparations. There were criminal inquiries too. Identity theft is a serious offense, and while prosecutors sometimes face hurdles proving intent, the weight of the evidence forced a settlement and a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The exact details of the settlement were private, but the important thing was this: the system recognized my claim, my identity was restored legally, and there was a formal record of what she had done. But no court can stitch back the years of trust lost. No judge can restore a childhood where your sister was your ally. The wounds remained. Yet something else took root, a fierce independence I hadn't known I'd needed. I learned to live with boundaries. I learned to say no without guilt. I learned that family ties do not obligate you to sacrifice yourself. Months later, when things cooled, I saw her from a distance. She'd lost friends, status, the illusion of a life built on my name. She looked smaller, real in a way that mirrored the first time I had seen her cornered. There was no public spectacle, I did not gloat. I had no desire to turn her downfall into entertainment. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for the choices that led her here. The sister I once knew had become someone I had to keep away from for my own safety. In the quiet after the storm, I focused on rebuilding the essentials: my finances, my reputation, and my peace. I reached out to a few close friends and explained everything, not to justify what I'd done, but to reclaim my narrative. People you trust react in different ways, some with shock, some with hurt that you didn't tell them sooner, some with steady support. The ones who mattered stayed. There is a lesson in all this, blunt and painful. Betrayal often begins in small acts that become normalized. A lie here, a convenience there, until one day the whole world is arranged around facades. The antidote is attention, to details, to differences between words and actions. It's also courage. It takes courage to read the papers, to call the agencies, to press charges against someone you love. It takes courage to stand in public and say, "This happened to me," and then follow through. If you ever find yourself in the position I was in, know this: protect yourself first. Freeze accounts. Contact authorities. Document everything. Then, if you can, seek a measured path to hold the person accountable, not to punish for the sake of pain, but to ensure it doesn't happen again to you or someone else. Justice doesn't always heal, but it does prevent repetition. When I look back now, years removed from that dark chapter, my life is quieter and steadier. I travel for work. I live in a small apartment that I pay for with my own name and my own credit. When I walk through the door at night, there is no shredder whirring in the study, no whispered phone calls, no hidden envelopes stuffed under drawers. There is certainty. There is the sound of my own keys. And sometimes, late at night, I open a drawer and touch the folder I once carried like armor. The paper is worn at the edges, but the words on it are simple evidence of one truth: I chose myself. I reclaimed what was mine. I stopped being someone else's shadow. That, in the end, felt like more than revenge. It felt like freedom.